I'm Alex Howards, and in this video I wanted just to explore one of the key elements of the Optimum Health Clinic approach to chronic fatigue, ME, and fibromyalgia. Now, it would help if you had the free information pack that we have sent to you in front of you, because it will just help you reference it. And what I wanted to do is just explore a little bit more the first of the three areas that we focus on there. So we look at subtypes, we look at stages, and we look at bodily systems. And in this video, we're going to explore the subtypes a little bit more. So just to give you a little bit of background and context around this, in the early days of the Optimum Health Clinic, one of the things that we noticed was that there seemed to be certain patterns. There were certain types of people that seemed to develop chronic fatigue, ME, fibromyalgia. And we noticed that this kind of broke down as certain ways they approached their life psychologically. So certain tendencies in terms of often being people that put everyone else's needs first. So kind of being a helper, always trying to support other people. And of course, if we do that consistently over time, that becomes physically very draining. But we also noticed there were certain physical qualities. So for example, there were certain people that just consistently had problems with their digestive system. And they'd been through prior to ME chronic fatigue, and it had been true on the other side of even recovery sometimes, that they had some delicacies going on there. And as we looked at this, what we realized is that there were certain predisposing factors, or what we've then classified as certain subtypes. And these are the kind of things that if you have several of these going on, it makes you more likely, more prone to develop something like chronic fatigue, ME, fibromyalgia. You see, the interesting thing is that people often get focused on the tipping point. They get focused on the last straw that broke the camel's back, be that the virus that they got, or the very stressful life situation that happened, or the physical ailment, like the physical injury, like breaking a leg or something like that. But we tend to focus on those things and go, well, that was the thing that caused me to get fibromyalgia or chronic fatigue, ME. But what we see is that there are certain things that make us much more vulnerable beforehand, and then that tipping point, that trigger event, is the thing that tips us over the edge. Now, understanding these subtypes is partly helpful because it's just useful to understand why did we develop it? Like, why me? To quote the title of my first book, like, why did this happen to me? And I could be able to understand the way that we lived our life before had an impact. But also in terms of facilitating recovery, dealing with these subtypes can be really important. In fact, it's not always the question of what caused us to get ill. It's also the question of what's stopping us from recovering. And if we've got certain ways we're living our life, or certain things happening in our body, which are constantly depleting us, it can be really important to address those to then actually support our lasting recovery. So to go through them in a little bit more detail, we break them into nutritional subtypes, or more physical subtypes, and into psychological subtypes. So nutritional subtypes are the adrenal type, the immune type, the digestive type, the toxicity overload type, and the structural type. And to go through each of those briefly individually, the adrenal type are people that have often a weakness in their endocrine system, in their adrenals, and they tend to be quite edgy and overstimulated and have that feeling in their body, often of feeling tired, but feeling wired. It's like something's always on in their system. And that can also be linked to issues around blood sugar, feelings of kind of dizziness and kind of irritability when we don't get food. The immune type tend to be people that have had a history of issues with their immune system. And this might be that they've had a history of things like lots of infections, perhaps they were given lots of antibiotics as a kid. It might be that their immune system is oversensitive, so there's various chemical sensitivities or food sensitivities. But there's often a history of things in the immune system that just have been overloaded. So for example, when I was a kid, I had adult-sized tonsils when I was 7, 8 years old, and I had constantly getting tonsillitis, and so eventually had those taken out. The digestive type is where people have had consistent weaknesses in the digestive system. It might be a history of irritable bowel syndrome, might be a history of something like ulcerative colitis, might be a history of Crohn's disease, or it might be something milder, where there's just been a tendency towards food sensitivities, tendency towards just not doing that well with digesting food. The toxic overload type is sometimes where we've actually had an event, like we've been exposed to organophosphates or some kind of toxic poisoning, or it might just be there's a build-up of toxicity in our body, and our body doesn't do a very good job of clearing out that toxicity. And the final of the nutritional or physical subtypes is a structural subtype. And that may be where there's something in our alignment, something in our posture, something in our skeletal system, which is just consistently out of balance or is having an impact on the overall function of our system. Then briefly to go into the psychological subtypes, there's the helper type. And the helper type is where we're consistently making other people's needs more important than our own. And so the build-up in that might be the years before somebody got ill, that they would come home from work and be utterly exhausted and think, oh God, I just can't wait to just relax and chill out. And they'd get a phone call from a friend who was in need, and they'd go and spend time with that friend who probably wasn't in any more need than they were, but they're used to being in that role of being the helper and being the support of other people. After a while, that becomes very depleting. Another example of a psychology subtype is the achiever subtype. That's where we're consistently measuring our self-worth by what we do and what we achieve. And whatever we do, whatever we achieve isn't really quite good enough. So we're always putting pressure on ourselves, always driving ourselves to be better, to be more successful. It's also very depleting, very draining to our system. There's also the trauma type, and that can be trauma with a kind of big T, like a big life event, like being sexually abused or being in a war zone or being in a bad car accident, where there's a kind of physical or emotional trauma that we experience. Or it can be more of a developmental trauma, where we just go through our life and we don't really get our emotional needs met in the way that we need to, and therefore we develop a sense that we're just not quite safe in the world somehow. And then we have the anxiety type. This is where there's just a constant sense of not being safe and being overstimulated and worried and trying to get a sense of safety by thinking things through in our mind and planning and prepping the whole time. It's very stimulating to our nervous system. It means we're constantly releasing stress hormones to try and get a sense of feeling safe. So with these subtypes, some people may be watching this and thinking, oh my God, I have all of those. Other people may be watching it and thinking, there's a few of those that I really recognize and they seem important. The key thing is, firstly, the title of our report, or the subtitle, is Solving the Puzzle. And understanding the puzzle of how we've got ill is often really helpful, but also understanding the key pieces of the puzzle that need to be addressed to facilitate recovery is really important. And so addressing these physical subtypes, addressing these psychological subtypes are key pieces and key building blocks of building the foundation to support an overall recovery. It may not be all that needs to be done, but it's certainly critical. It's also critical to prevent relapse. So there have been cases where people have had significant helper or achiever patterns, let's say, and they were unable to indulge those patterns because they were too ill to do so, and then recover, and then go back to being that person. Go back to pushing themselves, go back to taking care of everyone else, and then before you know it, they've recreated the same situation that made them ill in the first place. So dealing with these subtypes is really, really important. And the way that we do that is on the nutrition side. We understand, we get clarity of what's happening, and then we have a number of protocols we will work with to address these subtypes. On the psychology side, again, the same thing. We will identify what's happening and teach you tools and strategies to be able to actively work to change those underlying subtypes. So if you'd like to find out more about how you can work with one of the practitioner team, the best thing to do is to book a free 15-minute chat. And there's no pressure to sign up to anything in that process. It's simply a way for us to understand if we feel we can help you and to explain a little bit about how we might be able to do that. So if you request a 15-minute chat, you'll have a conversation with one of our new patient coordinators, and they'll gather some information, explain some key pieces, and then they'll arrange for you to speak to one of our psychology practitioners and or one of our nutrition practitioners as well. And that whole process is entirely free. It's simply a way for you to find out whether or not we may be able to help you. So thank you for watching. In the next video, which will come out in a few days' time, we're going to look at the stages of recovery. And that's really important for understanding why some treatments at certain stages can be immensely helpful, but actually can be harmful at other stages. So another really key piece of the OHC map to recovery from chronic fatigue, ME, and fibromyalgia. Thanks for watching.